As Caroline was saying about the retreat, there are few things in life which are as simple in reality as they seem to be on the surface. About 40 years ago, a man did an experiment with a plant, a rubber plant. He wanted to see how long it took for water to get from the roots to the leaf. So he put what was called a lie detector, because it's a very sensitive electrophysiological system, on the leaf, and poured some chemicals in the water, hoping he could get a change when those chemicals reached the leaf. Didn't work. So he thought maybe the stimulation wasn't great enough, so he figured he'd put the plant in hot water and see if that did anything. No change. So he figured, well, maybe the stimulation still isn't great enough. So he thought, I'll hold a match under the leaf and see if the heat will do something that way. And to his surprise, the machine spiked. It didn't spike when he held a match under the leaf. It spiked when he thought about holding the match under the leaf. And that experiment has been proven again in different, and it's in the book, The Secret Life of Plants. There's more to a plant than we realize. And the same with the Bible. There's more to the Bible than you realize. On the surface, it's a very straightforward, simple book, and it's true. God created the universe and us to be in fellowship with Him. We fell. He gave us laws that we could live by so that we could regain that fellowship. None of us can do those laws, which means we're due for punishment. So He sent His Son to take the punishment for us, so that if we accept His payment, if we accept what He's done, then we still get to have a relationship with God. That's simply what the Bible is about. Yes. But there are 66 books. It doesn't take 66 books just to say that, because there's more to it. That's why some people call the Bible a jigsaw puzzle or a mystery. To those people who don't know the Bible, it's a definite mystery. To those people who do, it's not so much. So if you have a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 15 again. This is a very familiar passage. We've done this before many times. And I'm not going to read this, but this is a parable of the prodigal son. Now, on the surface, this is a story of a child, a boy, who leaves a home, rebels against his parent, leaves home, squanders his wealth, then repents and comes back for forgiveness from the Father. Father being representative of God, and the prodigal son being representative of all of us. Forgiveness of sins. But then if you look deeper, it's really about the Father. It's about the Father's love of a son. And the Father's love, which is there regardless of what the Son has done. So it's really about the Father as much as about the Son. But if you look even further, it's really about the second son. If you look at the very start of the chapter, it says he was talking to the tax collectors and the Pharisees, who criticized him for dining with sinners. So he was giving them this parable. And if you look at the last of the chapter, he talks about the second son who was angry because his father was giving the fatted calf to the child, to the son who had run away. And he says very clearly that I have kept all your commandments. I have been with you all this time. The Pharisees were noted for keeping God's commandments to the letter. But Christ still called them sons of the devil, sons of perdition. You see, the thing that they lacked, that the Father showed, was compassion. So he was comparing the second son to the Pharisees, who had all the laws and all the rules and all the religiosity down pat, but none of the love and the compassion, which is what the law is about. The problem with this story is we don't know what happened after the party. Did the second son, forgive the first one? Did he forgive the father? Did they reconcile? What happened? What happens if the second son didn't forgive the father and the first son? We don't know. Because the story was meant to illustrate the Pharisaical attitude. So back now to Matthew chapter 18. This is another parable. This is not about the Pharisees, but this is very illustrative of what Christ called the kingdom of God, of which God was owed money by, or the king was owed money by his servant. Now, the kingdom of God would be God, owed money by a servant who could not pay the debt, which is us. We cannot pay the debt we owe God. So this servant went to the king asking for forgiveness. And though the king was ready to throw him into the dungeon initially, he had compassion. There's that word again, compassion. And he forgave the debt of the servant. This is very similar to the prodigal son, the father forgiving the son for being away. However, this goes on because now the son, or the servant, was owed money by a second servant. Now, in the days when this was written, there were three types of servants. One was a bond servant, one was an ordinary servant, one was a hired hand or a hired servant. So presumably the second servant was below the first. And he did not forgive the second servant of his debt. He was forgiven, but he did not forgive. When the king heard this, he rescinded his forgiveness of the first servant and had him thrown into prison. Now, is there a message there for us? If the king is equivalent to God, and we're equivalent to the first servants, what happens if we don't forgive those who owe us, or who we feel owe us something, or we owe somebody else? Can our forgiveness be rescinded? There's questions about this, but it does say this is a symbol, illustrative of God's kingdom. Go to Mark. This is where Pastor Bob almost stole my thunder for tonight. Because it talks about praying and forgiveness. And it says, you pray, forgive those who you feel owes you a debt. Because if you don't, then God will not hear your prayer, and he will not forgive you. This is very similar to the second parable. So, I know Roxanne is probably going to bring up on this, and that's great. But the idea is that the main theme of these three parables is forgiveness. Yes. The Pharisee did not forgive, or the Pharisaical son did not forgive his father or his brother, as far as we know, in the story. In the second story, the first servant did not forgive the second servant. But this story goes on further than the first, and it shows what happens when that forgiveness was not coming. And God says very clearly, when you pray, if you want your prayers answered, forgive. If you don't forgive, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. Simple, but certainly something to think about.